You build a world with someone. You pick the paint colors together. You argue about the sofa. You learn the specific sound of their key in the door at the end of the day. That world becomes your reality. It has its own gravity, its own atmosphere, and you think, because you built it together, it's structurally sound. You trust the foundation, but foundations can be built on shifting sand, and you might not know it until the earthquake comes. My world was named Leo, and for 3 years it was a good world, or so I believed. It was Friday night pizza and lazy Sunday mornings. It was inside jokes that would make no sense to anyone else. It was the quiet comfort of two bodies reading on opposite ends of the same couch. I thought we were a complete sentence, a thought, fully formed and finished with a period. I remember the exact moment I knew I loved him. We were in IKEA, of all places, that labyrinthine temple to domestic possibility where relationships go to either flourish or die. We've been arguing about a kitchen table for 20 minutes. I wanted the oak one with the simple lines. He insisted on the glass-topped monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. We were both getting frustrated, our voices rising slightly, when suddenly he stopped mid-sentence. "Wait," he said, looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Part bewilderment, part wonder. We're arguing about furniture, like actual furniture that we're going to put in our actual apartment and eat actual meals on for years. He started laughing, this infectious, delighted sound. "Emma, we're building a life together. How did that happen?" That's when I knew. Not because of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but because of that moment of recognition. The sudden awareness that we had, without quite meaning to, become an us. The oak table one, by the way. We ate countless meals on it, paid bills across its surface, made love on it one particularly memorable Tuesday afternoon when the delivery guy couldn't make it upstairs with our new mattress. The early days were a careful choreography of revelation. I learned that Leo hummed unconsciously when he was content. Usually old Beatles songs his father had played on repeat during their Saturday morning car rides to nowhere in particular. I discovered that he kept a small notebook where he wrote down things I said that made him laugh, claiming he wanted to remember them exactly. He found out about my compulsive need to read the last page of every book first, not to spoil the ending, but to know that the characters I was about to fall in love with would survive their trials. "That's cheating," he'd say, watching me flip to the final pages of whatever novel I'd just started. "That's preparation," I'd counter. "I need to know the house won't burn down before I agree to live in it." The irony of that exchange would later feel like a knife twist, but in those days, it was just another thread in the tapestry we were weaving together. We developed our own language, the way couples do. Nebraska became our code for when we needed to escape boring social situations, a reference to a particularly excruciating dinner party where the hosts spent 2 hours describing their timeshare in Omaha. Code Red meant one of us was having an anxiety spiral and needed the other to take over whatever social interaction was happening. Goldfish mode was our term for those perfect Sunday afternoons when we did absolutely nothing but exist in the same space, as content and mindless as pets in a well-maintained aquarium. I thought I knew him completely. I thought 3 years was enough time to map every corner of another person's soul, to understand their patterns and predict their responses. I knew he got cranky when his blood sugar dropped, and that he had to eat something within 20 minutes of waking up, or he'd be impossible all day. I knew he cried at movies, but only if he thought no one was watching, and that he had a secret addiction to reality TV shows about people renovating houses in foreign countries. I knew he was scared of commitment in the abstract, but craved it desperately in practice, that he needed the security of knowing someone would be there at the end of every day, but panicked if I so much as mentioned moving in together. Which is why, when he suggested we get a place together, I knew something fundamental had shifted in his internal landscape. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. He'd said one Thursday evening as we sat in his cramped studio apartment, sharing takeout Chinese from containers balanced precariously on his coffee table that was really just a repurposed storage ottoman. "I want us to have our own space, our own everything." I'd looked around at his carefully curated chaos, the stacks of books he swore he was going to read, the guitar he'd bought during a brief period of musical ambition and now served primarily as an expensive coat rack, the single photograph of us tucked into the corner of his bathroom mirror like a talisman, and I could see it. Our life expanded. Room to breathe and grow and become whatever we were supposed to become together. Finding the apartment was its own courtship. We looked at 17 places over 2 months, developing increasingly elaborate criteria and deal breakers. Natural light was non-negotiable. A bathtub was essential Leo's one luxury. Hardwood floors preferred, but we'd consider good laminate if the price was right. We needed at least one room that could serve as an office for both of us. He was freelancing as a graphic designer, working towards starting his own firm, and I was 3 months into a marketing job at a nonprofit that I actually loved. The place we finally chose was a second-floor walk-up in a converted Victorian, with crown molding that had been painted over so many times it looked like it was wearing a thick wool sweater, and windows that faced west so the living room turned golden every evening at sunset. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people, but it had a window over the sink where I could put plants. And Leo said that was the most important thing, that I'd have somewhere to nurture growing things. Moving in together was like learning a new dance. We had to negotiate bathroom schedules and figure out whose coffee maker to keep his, because mine had died a slow, grinding death the previous winter, and I'd been too lazy to replace it. We had to decide how to merge our book collections, which led to our first real fight as cohabitants when he suggested we get rid of duplicate copies of novels we both owned. But they're not the same. I'd insisted, holding up my battered paperback copy of Asterisk, The Time Traveler's Wife Asterisk, next to his pristine hardcover edition. "Look, mine has all my notes in the margins, and this page is dog-eared because I cried so hard I couldn't see to find my bookmark. These books have history." "Emma, they're the same words in the same order," he'd said, but he was smiling in that indulgent way that meant he thought I was being ridiculous but found it endearing rather than annoying. In the end, we kept both copies of everything. Our bookshelves became an archaeology of our separate lives, his organized by genre and author, mine arranged by emotional association and the vague sense that certain books belonged next to each other for reasons I couldn't articulate but felt strongly about. Those first few months of living together felt like the most natural thing in the world. We fell into routines without discussing them. Leo made coffee in the mornings while I showered. I cooked dinner while he answered emails. We took turns choosing what to watch on Netflix, though we both secretly preferred the nights when we couldn't agree and ended up just talking instead. Conversations that meandered from his latest client's impossible demands to my coworkers' dating disasters to whether we thought our parents had been happy in their marriages. That's what I thought love was supposed to feel like. Easy, comfortable, like coming home to yourself, but better, because there was someone there who was genuinely glad to see you walk through the door. I should have known it was too easy. I should have recognized that the relationships that feel effortless are often the ones where someone is doing all the work invisibly, making sacrifices so small and constant they don't register as sacrifices until you add them all up and realize you've been slowly disappearing. But I didn't know that then. Then I thought we were perfect. I thought we had figured out something that most people spent their whole lives searching for. I was so wrong it would have been funny if it hadn't nearly destroyed me. But a sentence can be fractured. A single piece of punctuation can change everything. I found the evidence not because I was looking for it, but because I was looking for something else. A photo from our vacation to the coast, to print and frame. It had been my idea to finally put some pictures up in our apartment, to make the walls reflect the life we were building rather than just the generic art prints we'd bought, because empty walls felt depressing. The vacation had been perfect. The kind of long weekend that feels stolen from ordinary time. We'd driven up to Mendocino on a Friday afternoon, Leo navigating while I played DJ. Both of us singing along to a playlist he'd made called Emma's Road Trip Favorites, a collection of songs I'd mentioned loving over the years, some of which I'd forgotten I'd ever told him about. The inn we'd booked was one of those aggressively quaint bed and breakfasts where everything was themed around Victorian romance, and the owners insisted on serving tea at 4 o'clock sharp, whether you wanted it or not. Our room had a view of the ocean and a four-poster bed that creaked alarmingly whenever either of us moved, which led to a lot of suppressed laughter during activities that were decidedly not Victorian. But the best part had been Saturday morning. We'd woken up early without an alarm, the way you do when you're somewhere that makes you want to be conscious for every moment. Leo had gone downstairs to get coffee while I stood at the window, watching the fog roll in from the Pacific like a slow-motion avalanche. When he came back, he'd brought not just coffee, but also pastries from the little bakery down the street. And we'd eaten breakfast in bed while planning our day with the kind of lazy deliberation that comes from having nowhere you have to be. The photo I was looking for had been taken that afternoon. We'd hiked out to the lighthouse, and I'd asked a passing tourist to take a picture of us standing at the edge of the cliff, the ocean stretching endlessly behind us. In the photo, Leo's arm is around my waist, and we're both laughing at something. I think he just made a joke about how we looked like the cover of a romance novel, all windswept hair and dramatic scenery. Looking at us in that picture, you'd think we were the happiest people alive. Maybe we were in that moment. Maybe that's what makes the betrayal so much worse. Not just that it happened, but that it happened alongside real joy, real connection, real love. At least real love on my part. I was humming that Tuesday morning as I searched for the photo, wrapped in the lingering warmth of the previous evening. Leo had come home from work unusually affectionate, bringing flowers for no reason and suggesting we order from the Thai place we'd been meaning to try. We'd eaten pad Thai on the couch while watching a documentary about urban beekeeping, and he'd fallen asleep with his head in my lap during the credits. I'd sat there for 20 minutes, just stroking his hair and feeling grateful for the ordinary miracle of being loved by someone who chose to share their daily existence with me. His laptop was on the kitchen table where he'd left it the night before, and he'd told me the password was always my birthday. I want you to be able to use it whenever you need to, he'd said when he first gave me the information. We shouldn't have secrets from each other. A gesture I'd found incredibly sweet, a gesture that now feels like the setup for a very cruel joke. I wasn't snooping, I was just, in our shared world, navigating it with the trust he had given me. The photos from our trip were supposed to be in a folder on his desktop labeled Mendocino Weekend. But when I clicked on it, it was empty. I tried searching for them by date, and that's when I saw it. A folder buried deep in his documents with a name that made no sense. Design Resources 2023. Curious, I clicked it open. Leo was notoriously disorganized with his file management, and I thought maybe he'd accidentally saved our vacation photos in the wrong place. Inside the folder, I found the wrecking ball. Photos, time-stamped photos, him and Sarah from his office. I knew Sarah. I'd met her at Leo's company Christmas party just 4 months earlier. She was the new art director, recently divorced, with the kind of effortless style that made me immediately conscious of my own carefully assembled outfits. Leo had introduced us with obvious pride, telling her about my work at the nonprofit, asking her about her kids from her first marriage. Emma's the one I told you about, he'd said, his hand on the small of my back in that possessive, but affectionate way that usually made me feel claimed in the best possible sense. She's got the best eye for design, even better than mine. You two should collaborate on something. Sarah had smiled and said all the right things about how Leo talked about me constantly, how he was clearly crazy about me, how lucky we were to have found each other. I'd liked her immediately. She seemed genuine, funny, a little sharp around the edges in a way that reminded me of my sister. Now I was looking at photos of her with my boyfriend. At a hotel bar I didn't recognize, her hand on his arm, leaning in close enough that her hair was brushing his shoulder. In what was clearly a hotel room, the generic art on the wall, a silent scream of anonymity. Sarah, wearing a black dress I'd never seen, laughing at something Leo was saying. Leo, wearing the blue button-down shirt I'd given him for his birthday, the one he claimed was his favorite. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. A Tuesday, he had told me he was working late, crunching for a big presentation for a potential client. I had made him a lasagna and left it in the fridge, with a note telling him I was proud of him and that I'd try to stay awake until he got home, but not to wake me if I'd fallen asleep on the couch. I remember that night clearly now, though I hadn't thought about it since it happened. He'd come home around midnight, smelling like beer and claiming he and his team had gone out for drinks after finally finishing the presentation. He'd eaten the lasagna cold, standing in the kitchen in his boxers, telling me about how stressful the day had been, how grateful he was to come home to me and my cooking and the life we'd built together. "You're too good to me," he'd said, kissing my forehead before we went to bed. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." I'd fallen asleep feeling loved, feeling valued, feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The photos told a different story. There were 15 of them, spanning what looked like an entire evening, the hotel bar, a restaurant I didn't recognize, but expensive looking, white tablecloths, wine glasses that caught the light, the kind of place Leo and I went for anniversaries. Sarah and Leo sharing a dessert, her feeding him something from her spoon with an intimacy that made my stomach clench, and then the hotel room photos. Not pornographic, but worse somehow, intimate in a way that spoke of comfort, familiarity, a relationship that had progressed far beyond a single night's mistake. Sarah curled against Leo's chest, both of them looking at something on her phone. Leo's hand in her hair, Sarah wearing Leo's shirt, the shirt I'd given him, and nothing else, laughing at something off camera. The physical sensation was academic at first. My body went cold, my fingers numb. My vision tunneled until the glowing screen was the only thing that existed. It was like my consciousness detached, floating above this woman, this me, who was staring at the end of her own story. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a white noise that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own heart, which I was sure had stopped. I sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, clicking through the photos with the methodical precision of someone conducting research. I was cataloging evidence, building a case, though I wasn't sure yet what trial I was preparing for. Each image was a small death, a tiny explosion that destroyed another piece of the reality I'd been living in. There was a video, too, just 30 seconds long, but it felt like watching my entire world collapse in real time. Sarah and Leo in bed, her head on his chest, him stroking her hair and saying something I couldn't quite make out, but I could read his lips well enough to catch the words "I love you." I love you, words he said to me every morning when he left for work and every night before we went to sleep. Words I thought belonged to us, to the private language we'd developed, to the sacred space we'd created together. Hearing him say them to someone else, seeing the tenderness in his expression as he said them, felt like watching someone desecrate a grave. Then the world rushed back in, and it was agony. It was a pain so precise it felt surgical. He had not just cheated on me, he had meticulously documented it. He had chosen the angles, he had smiled for the camera, he had saved the evidence like souvenirs from a vacation I hadn't been invited on. He had come home to me, eaten my lasagna, kissed my forehead, told me he was grateful for me, and all the while these images were sitting in a folder on his computer, a secret second life running parallel to our own. The betrayal was layered, complex, multifaceted. It wasn't just the physical infidelity, though that was devastating enough. It wasn't just the lies, though those cut deep. It was the careful curation of the evidence. The way he'd preserved these moments like they were precious memories worth keeping. It was the realization that while I'd been living fully in our shared reality, he'd been maintaining a completely separate existence, one where I didn't exist, where our relationship was just the backdrop against which his real life played out. I found myself thinking about all the times over the past few months when I'd felt like something was slightly off. Moments when Leo had seemed distracted or distant, when his responses to my questions had been just a beat too delayed, as if he'd had to remember which version of himself he was supposed to be in that moment. I'd attributed it to work stress, to the normal ebbs and flows of long-term relationships, to my own occasional tendency toward anxiety and overthinking. Now I realized I'd been living with a stranger. The Leo who came home to me every night, who made coffee in the mornings and argued with me about what to watch on Netflix, and fell asleep with his head in my lap during documentaries about urban beekeeping, was just one version of himself. There was another Leo, one who took other women to expensive restaurants and expensive hotels, who said "I love you" to someone else with the same tenderness I thought was reserved for me. The worst part was how normal everything had seemed, how he'd managed to compartmentalize so completely that his betrayal never bled through into our daily life. He'd kissed me goodbye that Tuesday morning with what seemed like genuine affection. He'd texted me during the day. I scrolled back through my messages to check, sending me a link to an article about a nonprofit doing work similar to mine, asking if I wanted to grab lunch later in the week, telling me he missed me even though we'd been apart for less than 4 hours. While he was planning his evening with Sarah, he was maintaining the fiction of our relationship with a precision that spoke of practice, of a skill developed over time. This wasn't a single mistake, a moment of weakness, a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a double life, carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. I thought about Sarah, about her children from her first marriage, about how she'd seemed so genuine when we met. Had she known about me? Did she think Leo was single, or was she complicit in the deception? Was I the secret, or was she? The uncertainty made everything worse, because it meant I couldn't even trust my own reading of the situation, my own ability to understand what was happening in my own life. I closed the laptop and sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of our shared domestic life. The coffee mug Leo had used that morning, with the ring stain on the table that I'd been meaning to remind him to use a coaster for. The grocery list we'd written together on Sunday, his handwriting mixed with mine in a palimpsest of mundane planning. The flowers he'd brought me the night before, now wilted slightly but still beautiful, still carrying the sweet scent that had made me smile when he'd walked through the door. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. It was like discovering that the house you'd been living in for years was built on a sinkhole, that the foundation you'd trusted was slowly giving way beneath your feet. Every happy memory, every moment of connection, every time I'd felt grateful for what we had together, all of it was now suspect, tainted by the knowledge that it had coexisted with this elaborate deception. I started laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. Here I was, sitting in our kitchen, looking for vacation photos to print and frame. Photos that would commemorate a weekend when we'd seemed perfectly happy together, perfectly in love. And instead, I'd found evidence that our entire relationship was a lie. The laughter turned to tears and then to something else, a cold, crystalline fury that felt like swallowing ice. He had done this to us. To me, yes, but also to us, to the entity we'd created together, to the life we'd been building. He had taken everything I'd trusted, everything I'd invested in, everything I'd believed about who we were together, and he'd made it all a joke. But even in my fury, even in my devastation, I knew I couldn't confront him immediately. I needed time to process, to plan, to figure out what I wanted to do with this information. Because once I said something, once I acknowledged what I knew, there would be no going back. Our relationship, whatever it actually was, would be over. The life we'd built together would be dismantled. The future I'd been imagining would disappear. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I wasn't ready to hear his explanations, his excuses, his attempts to minimize what he'd done or blame me for somehow driving him to it. I wasn't ready to watch him cry and beg for forgiveness while simultaneously having to be the one to comfort him through the consequences of his own choices. So I sat in our kitchen with my devastating knowledge, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life, and I waited. I waited for him to come home, to kiss my forehead, to ask about my day, to maintain the elaborate fiction that we were happy together. I waited to see if I could bear it, if I could pretend I didn't know what I knew, if I could buy myself enough time to figure out who I wanted to be when this was all over. The waiting was its own special torture. Every minute that passed was another minute of living in the lie, another minute of being complicit in my own deception. But I needed those minutes. I needed the time to grieve for what I'd lost before I had to face the reality of what came next. When Leo finally came home that evening, he was exactly the same as always. He kissed my forehead, asked about my day, thanked me for the leftover pasta I'd heated up for his dinner. He told me about a difficult client, about a project that was giving him trouble, about how glad he was to be home with me at the end of another long day. I watched him perform our relationship, and I marveled at how good he was at it, how seamlessly he slipped between his two lives, how effortlessly he maintained the fiction of our happiness. He was either a sociopath or an actor of extraordinary skill. Either way, the person I'd thought I loved didn't exist. He was just a character Leo played when he was with me, a role he'd perfected over 3 years of practice. That night, as he fell asleep beside me, his breathing settling into the familiar rhythm I'd found so comforting for so long, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning my revenge. The confrontation was worse than the discovery. It's one thing to see the crime scene. It's another to sit with the criminal as he tries to explain the broken laws of your shared universe. I waited 3 days. 3 days of perfect performance on both our parts. Him maintaining his fiction, me pretending I still believed in it. I watched him kiss me goodbye each morning and wondered if he was thinking about Sarah. I listened to him tell me about his day and cataloged each lie by omission, each careful editing of his narrative to exclude the parts of his life I wasn't supposed to know about. On Thursday, he worked late again, or claimed to. I didn't bother checking if he was telling the truth. It didn't matter anymore. I spent the evening sitting in our living room, surrounded by all the evidence of the life we'd built together, and I practiced what I was going to say. I'd considered multiple approaches. I could print out the photos and leave them on the kitchen table for him to find. I could pack my things and disappear, leaving only a note explaining that I knew. I could call Sarah and ask her what the hell she thought she was doing. I could show up at Leo's office and make a scene, force him to choose between his 2 lives in front of an audience. But in the end, I decided on a direct confrontation. I wanted to look him in the eye when I told him I knew. I wanted to watch his face as his carefully constructed world collapsed. I wanted to hear what excuses he'd offer, what justifications he'd try to sell me. I wanted to see if there was any part of the Leo I'd fallen in love with left underneath the stranger I'd been living with. Friday evening, I cooked dinner, not because I was feeling generous, but because I wanted everything to seem normal until the moment I destroyed his sense of security, the way he'd destroyed mine. I made his favorite meal chicken parmesan with home-made sauce, garlic bread. The salad with the vinaigrette he claimed was better than anything he'd ever had at a restaurant. He came home in a good mood, bringing wine and telling me about a project he just landed, a big client that could set his freelance career on a whole new trajectory. He was animated, excited, more present than he'd been in weeks. This could change everything for us, he said, opening the wine while I plated our dinner. I'll be able to afford a real office space, maybe even hire an assistant. We could start thinking about buying a place, maybe even taking that trip to Italy we've been talking about. He was including me in his future plans with such apparent sincerity that I almost wondered if I'd imagined the photos, if I'd somehow misinterpreted what I'd seen. But then I noticed he was wearing the same blue shirt from the hotel room photos, and the brief moment of doubt evaporated. We ate dinner like we had hundreds of times before. Leo told me about his day, asked about mine, complained about a client who couldn't make up their mind about a logo design. I responded appropriately, asked follow-up questions, laughed at his stories about his coworkers' dating disasters. We could have been any couple on any Friday night, sharing a meal in each other's company at the end of another week. It was only after we'd finished eating, after Leo had opened a second bottle of wine and settled onto the couch with his laptop to show me some designs he'd been working on, that I finally spoke. I found the photos, I said. The words came out calmly, quietly, with none of the drama I'd been imagining. Leo looked up from his laptop, confusion flickering across his face. What photos? He asked, and for a moment I thought he might genuinely not know what I was talking about. Then I saw the flash of recognition, followed immediately by panic, and I knew he understood exactly what I meant. The photos of you and Sarah, I said, from 2 weeks ago, the hotel bar, the restaurant, the hotel room. I was looking for pictures from our Mendocino trip, and I found your other vacation instead. Leo's face went white. He set his laptop aside carefully, as if he needed to buy himself time to think, to figure out what to say. When he finally looked at me, his expression was a mixture of guilt, fear, and something that might have been relief. Emma, he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. I don't want to hear your explanation yet, I said. First, I need you to understand what I saw. I saw 15 photos and a video that document an entire evening you spent with another woman. I saw you feeding her dessert at a restaurant I've never been to. I saw her wearing your shirt in a hotel room. I heard you tell her you love her. Each word felt like a small explosion in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Leo was staring at me like I was a stranger, like he couldn't believe I was capable of this level of controlled fury. I saw evidence of a relationship, Leo. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, but a relationship. One that you documented and saved like it was something precious to you. So before you start telling me what it meant or didn't mean, I need you to acknowledge what it was. Leo was crying now, tears streaming down his face in a way that would have broken my heart just a week earlier. Now it just made me angry. You're right, he said, his voice thick with tears. You're absolutely right, it wasn't. It wasn't just one night. Sarah and I, we've been seeing each other for about 3 months. 3 months, a quarter of a year. An entire season of our relationship had been a lie. I thought about everything that had happened in the past 3 months. Leo's birthday, when I'd thrown him a surprise party, and he'd seemed genuinely moved by the effort I'd put into making it special. Thanksgiving with my family, when he'd charmed my parents and helped my mom with the dishes and told my sister he was thinking about proposing soon. Christmas morning, when we'd exchanged gifts and made love on the couch while snow fell outside our window and I'd thought I'd never been happier. All of it had happened while he was maintaining another relationship. All of those moments of connection, all of that joy, all of my gratitude for what we had together. It had all coexisted with his elaborate deception. 3 months, I repeated. So when you told my sister you were thinking about proposing to me, you were already sleeping with someone else. Emma, please, Leo said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away like his touch would burn me. When we spent Christmas morning in bed, talking about how perfect our life was, you had another woman's number programmed into your phone under a fake name. How did you? He started, then stopped himself. I checked, I said. After I found the photos, I checked everything. Sarah's number is saved as Sam from the gym. Very creative. Leo buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to comfort him, to put my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay. Then I remembered the video of him stroking Sarah's hair, telling her he loved her, and the instinct died. Why? I asked. That's what I don't understand. If you wanted to be with someone else, why didn't you just break up with me? Why did you have to make me complicit in my own humiliation? Leo looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Because I love you, he said. I love you, Emma. I never stopped loving you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Don't, I said. Don't you dare tell me you love me right now. You don't get to claim love as an excuse for what you've done. But I do love you, he insisted. What happened with Sarah, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change what we have together. I stared at him, marveling at his ability to compartmentalize, to somehow believe that his feelings for me could remain pure and untouched, while he systematically betrayed everything our relationship was supposed to mean. What we have together, I repeated slowly, is a lie. Everything we have together is built on your deception. Every morning when you kissed me goodbye, every night when you told me you loved me, every time you made plans for our future. All of it was happening while you were living a completely separate life with another woman. It's not like that, Leo said, but his voice was weak, uncertain. Then what is it like? I asked. Explain it to me, Leo. Help me understand how you can tell two different women you love them and have it mean the same thing. Help me understand how you can make love to me on Sunday night and then take another woman to a hotel on Tuesday. Help me understand how you can talk about buying a house together and taking trips to Italy while you're saving photos of yourself with someone else like their precious memories. Leo was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know, he said. I don't know how to explain it. It just happened. Sarah and I, we connected over work stuff, and then we started getting drinks after meetings, and then one night she kissed me, and I didn't stop her, and after that, it just kept happening. For 3 months, I said. For 3 months, he agreed, while you were planning a future with me, yes. While you were telling me you'd never been happier, yes. While you were meeting my family and talking about marriage and acting like I was the most important person in your life, you are, he said, looking at me with desperate sincerity. You are the most important person in my life, Emma. Sarah is just, she's just what? I asked when he trailed off. She's just different, he said finally. She's fun in a way that doesn't have consequences. Being with her feels like playing hooky from real life, but you, Emma, you are my real life, you're my home. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. So I'm your real life, and she's your fantasy. I'm your home, and she's your vacation. I'm the person you come back to after you've had your fun with someone who doesn't have consequences. That's not what I meant, Leo said quickly, but I could see in his eyes that it was exactly what he'd meant. Do you hear yourself? I asked. Do you hear what you're saying to me? You're telling me that our entire relationship, everything I thought we'd built together, is just your fallback plan. I'm not the person you choose, Leo. I'm the person you settle for when you're done playing with someone more exciting. That's not true, he said, but the protest was half-hearted. It is true, I said. And the worst part is that you don't even see how insulting it is. You think you can have both, the stability and security of a committed relationship with me, and the excitement and novelty of an affair with Sarah. You think you can compartmentalize your life so neatly that neither relationship has to suffer. I stood up from the couch, suddenly unable to sit still. I started pacing the length of our living room, past the bookshelves we'd filled together, past the photos we'd chosen and framed, past the couch where we'd spent countless evenings reading and watching movies and planning our future. But here's what you didn't consider, I continued. You made that choice for me without asking. You decided that I was the kind of person who would be okay living a lie, who would be satisfied with half of your attention and half of your loyalty and half of your heart. You decided that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me, as if my ignorance somehow made your betrayal less real. Leo was sobbing now, the kind of desperate, ugly crying that comes from genuine despair. "Emma, please," he said. "Please, I know I fucked up. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can figure out how to rebuild trust. I'll do anything to make this right." I stopped pacing and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since I'd started talking. He looked small, diminished, like a child who'd been caught doing something he knew was wrong but didn't fully understand the consequences of. And in that moment, I realized that despite everything he'd done to me, despite the elaborate deception and the months of lies, part of me still loved him. But loving someone and being able to trust them are two different things. And without trust, love is just a beautiful poison that slowly destroys you from the inside. "No," I said quietly, "we can't work through this. Emma, please, we can't work through this." I repeated, "Because you don't even understand what you've done. You keep talking about making it right, about fixing things, as if this was just a problem that needs solving. But it's not, Leo. It's not a problem. It's who you are." He looked at me with confusion and hurt, and I almost felt sorry for him. "You're the kind of person who can maintain 2 relationships for 3 months without either woman knowing about the other." I explained. "You're the kind of person who can look me in the eye every morning and lie about where you were the night before. You're the kind of person who can plan a future with someone while actively betraying them. That's not something counseling can fix, Leo. That's just who you are." "That's not who I am," he said desperately. "This isn't me, Emma. I don't know what happened. I don't know how I became this person. But this isn't who I really am." I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd loved for 3 years. This man I'd built a life with. This man I'd trusted with my future and my heart. And I realized that he was right in a way. The Leo who had cheated on me, who had lied to me, who had constructed an elaborate double life. Maybe that wasn't who he really was. Maybe it was just who he became when the stakes got high enough, when the temptation was strong enough, when he thought he could get away with it. But that didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Because it meant I could never trust him again, never be sure which version of himself he would choose to be in any given moment. "You're right," I said. "This probably isn't who you really are, but it is who you chose to be. For 3 months, every day, you chose to be this person. You chose to lie to me, to betray me, to make me complicit in my own deception. And now you want me to believe that it was all some kind of temporary madness, some aberration that will never happen again." I sat back down on the couch, suddenly exhausted. "But here's the thing, Leo. I don't care who you really are anymore. I only care who you chose to be, and you chose to be someone I can't trust." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us crying now. The weight of what was ending settled over the room like a heavy blanket. 3 years of shared history, of inside jokes and private moments and plans for the future, all of it dissolving into the space between us. Finally, Leo spoke. "What happens now?" I wiped my eyes and looked at him. "Now you tell me the truth, all of it, and then you leave. Leave. This is my apartment too, Leo. I'm not the one who destroyed our relationship. I'm not the one who needs to find somewhere else to sleep tonight." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said. "I want to know how it started, how long it's been going on, where you've been when you told me you were working late. I want to know if Sarah knows about me, if your coworkers know, if anyone in your life has been laughing at me behind my back while I played the devoted girlfriend to a man who was screwing someone else." So he told me everything, how Sarah had started flirting with him during late meetings, how they'd begun getting drinks together after work, how the first kiss had happened in the parking garage of their office building after a particularly stressful day, how they'd started meeting for lunch, then dinner, then overnight stays at hotels when Sarah's ex-husband had the kids. He told me that Sarah knew about me but had convinced herself that our relationship was essentially over, that Leo was just too cowardly to break up with me officially. He told me that none of his coworkers knew. that he and Sarah had been careful to keep their relationship professional in public. He told me that he'd been planning to break up with Sarah, that he'd realized he was making a terrible mistake, that he'd been trying to figure out how to end it without destroying his working relationship with her. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I was going to confess everything and beg you to forgive me. I needed more time to figure out how." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised us both. "You were going to tell me," I repeated. "When, after you married me, after we bought a house together, after I'd wasted even more years of my life on someone who was hedging his bets, I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know when I would have told you. Maybe never. Maybe I would have just ended it with Sarah and hoped you never found out." At least he was being honest now. It was a small consolation, but it was something. "Pack a bag," I said. "Stay with a friend tonight or get a hotel room. I don't care where you go, but I need you to not be here." He nodded and started to get up, then stopped. "Emma," he said, and something in his voice made me look at him one more time. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't mean anything now. I know it doesn't change what I did. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for all of it. For hurting you, for lying to you, for making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is that you were always too good for me." I stared at him, this man who had been the center of my world just a few hours earlier, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, and the hurt, and the sense of betrayal that would probably take years to fully process. But underneath all of that, I felt something new, a cold, clear certainty about who I was and what I deserved. "You're right," I said. "I was too good for you, and you know what? I'm going to remember that." He packed a bag in silence while I sat on the couch, staring at the walls we'd painted together, at the life we'd built that was now ending. When he was ready to leave, he stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at me like he wanted to say something else. "Go," I said before he could speak. "Just go." After he left, I sat in our apartment, my apartment now, and felt the silence settle around me like dust after an explosion. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. I was different, and that's when I started planning my revenge. But first, I needed to understand something about myself, about what I was capable of, when someone tried to rewrite the story of my own life. The most profound realization wasn't about Leo's capacity for betrayal. It was about my own capacity for survival, for reinvention, for refusing to let someone else's weakness define my worth. I had been too good for him, and I was about to prove it. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who has spent months carefully constructing a lie is to show them what truth actually looks like. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in our bed, my bed now, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the nature of mistakes. Leo had used that word during our confrontation, though not in the way he would later. He'd called his affair a terrible mistake, as if it were something that had happened to him rather than something he'd chosen, day after day, for 3 months. But lying there in the dark, I realized that the real mistake wasn't his betrayal. The real mistake was mine, believing that love alone was enough to sustain a relationship, that good intentions could substitute for integrity, that the comfort of routine could mask the absence of genuine commitment. I'd been living in a romantic comedy while he was starring in a thriller. I'd thought we were co-authors of the same story, but he'd been writing a completely different book. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I wasn't actually ill, but I wasn't exactly healthy either. I was in that liminal space between one version of myself and another, and I needed time to figure out who I was going to become next. I started by systematically going through our apartment, separating his belongings from mine, boxing up 3 years of shared accumulation. It was archaeological work, each item a small excavation of memory. The coffee mug he'd bought me from a weekend trip to Portland, back when we were still in the early stages of learning each other's preferences. The throw blanket his mother had given us for Christmas, soft blue wool that we'd fought over during movie nights. The framed photo from my birthday dinner last year, both of us laughing at something the waiter had said. Everything had to be categorized now, his, mine, or ours. But ours was a category that no longer existed, so those items became a third pile of things that would need to be divided or discarded. Relationships between objects that had become as fractured as the relationship between their owners. The work was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Each item I packed was a small act of reclamation, a way of saying this part of my life belongs to me now. I was editing the story of our relationship, removing his character from scenes that had once seemed to require his presence. But the more I packed, the angrier I became, not just at Leo's betrayal, but at my own naivety. How had I missed the signs? How had I convinced myself that his increasingly frequent late nights, his new attention to his appearance, his sudden interest in weekend work conferences were all innocent developments in a relationship that was growing stronger rather than warning signs of one that was already fractured? I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, all the moments when I'd sensed something was off, but had chosen to trust my love for him over my instincts about his behavior. I'd been so invested in the story of our happiness that I'd ignored the plot holes, the inconsistencies, the places where the narrative didn't quite make sense. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called Sarah. Her number was still saved in my phone from when Leo had given it to me months earlier, suggesting we might want to coordinate on a surprise party for one of their coworkers. The irony of that gesture, using me to help maintain his cover story, was almost impressive in its audacity. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. "This is Sarah." "Hi, Sarah, this is Emma." I said, "Leo's girlfriend, I think we need to talk." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then, Emma, yes, I think we do. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had memories with Leo. I arrived first and chose a table in the back corner, somewhere we could have privacy for what I assumed would be a difficult conversation. Sarah walked in 10 minutes later, and I was struck again by how put together she looked even in crisis. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her outfit the kind of effortlessly chic ensemble that I always aspired to but never quite achieved. She looked like the kind of woman who had never doubted her own desirability, who had never spent 20 minutes in front of a mirror wondering if her outfit was trying too hard or not trying hard enough. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, her voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't sure you would want to." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, "but I need to understand what happened, from your perspective." She nodded and signaled for the waitress, ordering a complicated latte that seemed designed to buy her time to think. I waited, studying her face, trying to reconcile this composed, articulate woman with the person who had spent months helping my boyfriend betray me. "Leo told you about us," she said finally. "It wasn't a question. I found photos." I said on his laptop. He told me the rest. Sarah winced. "The photos. He promised me he deleted those. He saved them in a folder called Design Resources." I said and watched her face flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said. That's humiliating for both of us." "Is it?" I asked. "Because it seems like the humiliation is mostly mine. You got to be the exciting secret. I got to be the fool who didn't know." Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring her latte with mechanical precision. "You have every right to hate me," she said finally. "I know what we did was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But," I prompted, sensing there was more. "But I need you to understand that Leo told me your relationship was over," she said, meeting my eyes for the first time since she'd sat down. "He said you were more like roommates than lovers. that you'd grown apart but were both too comfortable to make the official break. He said he was planning to end things with you. He just needed to figure out the logistics. I stared at her, feeling a new kind of anger bloom in my chest. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him, she admitted. Leo is. He's charming, he's persuasive, and I was lonely after my divorce, and he made me feel special, desired, like I was worth the risk. Worth the risk of what? His comfortable living situation. Sarah flinched. I know how it sounds. I know what you must think of me. But from my perspective, I wasn't the other woman. You were. The words hit me like a physical blow. In Sarah's version of the story, she was the new relationship, the real relationship, the one Leo was choosing. I was just the lingering remnant of his past that he hadn't gotten around to discarding yet. He never acted like a man who was planning to break up with his girlfriend, I said. He introduced me to you at the Christmas party as the person he was crazy about. He talked about our future together, about marriage and buying a house and taking trips together. Does that sound like someone who's planning to end things? It sounds like someone who's conflict-averse and doesn't know how to have difficult conversations. Sarah said, Leo has a problem with confrontation. He told me that about himself early on, that he tends to avoid hard situations until they become impossible to ignore. I laughed, a sharp sound that made the couple at the next table look over. So his inability to break up with me was just another character flaw you found endearing. I thought I could help him. Sarah said quietly, I thought if I was patient, if I gave him time and space to figure things out, he would eventually find the courage to be honest with both of us. How long were you willing to wait? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. We never set a timeline. He kept saying he needed more time, and I kept giving it to him. I studied her face, trying to understand how an intelligent, successful woman could convince herself that being someone's secret was acceptable, even temporarily. Did you love him? The question seemed to surprise her. She was quiet for a long time, considering her answer. I thought I did, she said finally. But looking back, I think what I loved was the idea of him, the fantasy of being chosen by someone who seemed so devoted to his girlfriend. It felt like winning something. Winning what? Proof that I was desirable enough to make a man risk everything for me, she said. After my divorce, I felt discarded, like damaged goods that no one would want. Leo made me feel powerful again. I felt something shift in my understanding of the situation. Sarah wasn't a predator who had stolen my boyfriend. She was a woman who had been made vulnerable by her own pain, and Leo had exploited that vulnerability for his own gratification while simultaneously exploiting my trust. He used both of us, I said. Sarah nodded. I'm starting to see that. He told me what I needed to hear to feel special, and he told you what you needed to hear to feel secure. He managed to give each of us just enough to keep us invested without having to actually commit to either relationship. And now what? I asked. Are you planning to keep seeing him? God, no, Sarah said immediately. Finding out that you didn't know about us, that you thought your relationship was solid. It changes everything. I can't be with someone who's capable of that level of deception. If he could lie to you so convincingly for 3 months, what was he lying to me about? I hadn't considered that angle, but she was right. Leo's betrayal of me was also a betrayal of her, in a different way. He'd made her complicit in something she might not have agreed to if she'd understood the full scope of his deception. I'm quitting my job, Sarah continued. I can't work with him anymore, not after this. It's too complicated, and frankly, I don't trust myself to make good decisions where he's concerned. That seems extreme, I said. Maybe, but I need a clean break. I need to start over somewhere he isn't. Somewhere I don't have to see him every day and remember how stupid I was. I understood the impulse. Part of me wanted to burn down everything in my life that reminded me of Leo, to start fresh in a place where his betrayal couldn't touch me. But another part of me, a stronger part, wanted to stay and fight for the life I'd built, even if I had to rebuild it without him. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. I nodded. "What are you going to do now? Are you going to try to work things out with him?" "No," I said immediately. "That's not even a possibility. He destroyed something that can't be repaired. So you're going to leave him?" I considered the question. Leaving him was the obvious choice, the healthy choice, the choice that every relationship expert and self-help book would recommend. But leaving felt reactive, like letting his betrayal dictate the terms of my life. "I'm going to show him what a real mistake looks like," I said. Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" I wasn't entirely sure what I meant, not yet. But as I sat there across from this woman who had shared my boyfriend for 3 months, I felt something crystallize in my mind. A plan, or at least the beginning of one. "Leo thinks what he did was a mistake," I explained. "He wants to minimize it, to make it seem like an accident, something that just happened to him rather than something he chose. But I'm going to show him the difference between an accident and a choice." "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "I don't think revenge is going to make you feel better." "This isn't about feeling better," I said. "This is about justice. About reclaiming my agency in a situation where I've been made powerless." Sarah looked worried, but she didn't try to talk me out of it. Maybe she understood the need for some kind of balancing of scales, some way to restore equilibrium to a situation that had been fundamentally unfair. We parted ways outside the coffee shop, two women who had been brought together by one man's inability to choose between us. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt clearer than I had since finding those photos. I knew what I needed to do, but first, I needed to understand something about the nature of choice, about the difference between things that happen to you and things you make happen. I needed to learn the difference between being a victim and being an author. That evening, I went to an art gallery. Not because I was particularly interested in art, but because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't our apartment, somewhere that didn't echo with the ghost of the life Leo and I had shared. The gallery was hosting a showing for a local artist, and the theme was kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, embracing the flaws and fractures as part of objects' history, making them the most beautiful part of the piece. It felt fitting. I was a piece of broken pottery, and I was about to learn how to gild my own cracks. I walked through the hushed room slowly, letting the silence wash over me like a bomb. The pieces were stunning, bowls and vases, and sculptures that had been deliberately broken and then reassembled with veins of gold that turned their damage into decoration. Each crack was highlighted rather than hidden, transformed from a flaw into a feature. I stopped in front of a large canvas, a violent, beautiful swirl of black and deep crimson with veins of gold leaf cutting through the chaos like lightning frozen in time. It was pain transformed into something valuable. It was destruction made into art. It's not about hiding the break. A voice said beside me, it's about making it the most interesting part. I turned to see a man standing next to me, his attention focused on the painting rather than on me. He was tall, with dark hair and kind eyes that held a weight to them, a history I couldn't read but recognized. He wasn't trying to pick me up, wasn't using the art as an excuse to start a conversation. He was just sharing an observation, the way you might comment on the weather to a stranger waiting for the same bus. The philosophy is beautiful, I said, surprising myself by responding, but I imagine the pottery doesn't enjoy being broken in the first place. He smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face from merely attractive to genuinely compelling. True, but maybe the point isn't about enjoying the breaking. Maybe it's about what you choose to do with the pieces afterward. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both studying the painting. There was something peaceful about his presence, undemanding in a way that felt like a gift after months of Leo's increasingly complex emotional needs. Liam, he said eventually. Emma, I replied. Are you an artist, Emma? He asked. No. I work for a nonprofit, mostly grant writing and program development. Not very creative, I'm afraid. I disagree, Liam said. Grant writing is storytelling. You have to take someone else's vision and make it compelling enough that strangers want to invest in it. That's a very specific kind of artistry. I found myself smiling for the first time in days. I never thought of it that way. What brings you here tonight? He asked, besides an appreciation for Japanese repair techniques. The question was casual, but something in his tone suggested he understood that people didn't usually wander into art galleries alone on Friday nights unless they were looking for something, or running from something. I'm learning about the art of becoming, I said, the words coming out before I'd fully formed the thought, about how to transform damage into something valuable. Liam nodded as if this made perfect sense. Recent damage? Very recent, I admitted, still figuring out what to do with the pieces. May I ask what happened? The question was gentle, with no pressure behind it. I got the sense that he would accept any answer I gave, including no answer at all. Something about his calm presence, his lack of agenda, made me want to tell him. Not everything. The full story was too raw, too complicated to share with a stranger, but the essential truth. I found out that the person I've been building a life with has been building a different life with someone else. I said, for months. And now I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not half of a couple. That's a particular kind of breaking, Liam said quietly. The kind that makes you question not just the relationship, but your own judgment. Your ability to read situations, to trust your instincts. I looked at him more carefully. You sound like you know something about it. My ex-wife had an affair, he said simply, 2 years ago. It lasted about 6 months before I found out. The betrayal was devastating, but what was almost worse was realizing how much of myself I'd lost in the process of trying to make the marriage work. How do you mean? I'd become so focused on being the kind of husband she seemed to want that I'd forgotten who I was when I wasn't trying to please someone else. He said, the affair was terrible, but in a strange way, it forced me to remember that I existed as a complete person, not just as half of a unit. We moved through the gallery together, stopping to discuss pieces that caught our attention. Liam had an easy way of talking about art that wasn't pretentious or academic. He talked about color and form and emotional response the way other people discuss the weather, with natural fluency and genuine interest. What do you do? I asked as we stood in front of a sculpture made from broken mirrors reassembled into the shape of a phoenix. I'm a therapist, he said. I work mostly with people who are navigating major life transitions. Divorce, career changes, loss, identity shifts. People who are trying to figure out who they are when the story they've been telling themselves about their life suddenly doesn't fit anymore. Is that why you're here tonight? I asked professional interest in the art of repair. Partly, he said, but mostly I'm here because I find it peaceful. There's something hopeful about seeing broken things made beautiful. It reminds me that endings can also be beginnings. We continued talking as we made our way through the rest of the exhibit. Liam was easy to be with in a way that felt foreign after months of walking on eggshells with Leo, trying to navigate his moods and needs while suppressing my own instinct about what was wrong in our relationship. Would you like to get coffee? Liam asked as we prepared to leave the gallery. There's a place around the corner that stays open late, and I'm not quite ready to go home to an empty apartment. I almost said no. The reasonable thing to do would be to go home, process what had happened with Leo, give myself time to grieve before even thinking about connecting with someone new. But standing there in the gallery, surrounded by art that celebrated the beauty of brokenness, I realized that being reasonable had gotten me into this situation in the first place. I'd been so focused on being the perfect girlfriend, so committed to making Leo happy and maintaining the peace in our relationship, that I'd ignored every warning sign, every instinct that told me something was wrong. Maybe it was time to stop being reasonable. Maybe it was time to start being intentional. Yes, I said, I'd like that. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place I would have expected Liam to suggest. Small, dimly lit, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. We found a corner table, and I ordered chamomile tea while he got something complicated involving espresso and steamed milk. So, he said once we were Settled, tell me about this nonprofit where you practice the art of storytelling. I found myself describing my job with more enthusiasm than I'd felt in months. The organization worked to provide educational resources to underserved communities, and my role involved writing grants to fund new programs and developing materials to help communities advocate for themselves. It sounds like meaningful work. Liam said, "It is." I agreed, or it was until recently. Lately, I've been so distracted by my personal life that I haven't been giving it the attention it deserves. Distracted how? I considered how to answer that question honestly. I think I've been so focused on trying to make my relationship work that I forgot I had other priorities. I kept telling myself that once Leo and I figured things out, once we got engaged or moved to a bigger place, or whatever the next milestone was supposed to be, then I'd be able to focus on my career